Cool. So thanks for coming, Holden.
Yeah.
Just to kind of warm us up, give us an overview of what Open Phil has been up to in the last 12 months since our last chat, and what your plans are for the following year.
Sure. So Open Philanthropy is a grant maker. That's our main activity. And right now, I would say we're in kind of an intermediate stage in our development. So we're giving away a bit over $100 million a year. That's been true for the last couple of years. We do want to grow that number at some point. But we have this, this belief that what we should be doing right now is strengthening the organization, strengthening our intellectual frameworks, our approach, our operations, and just kind of getting used to operating at this scale, which is big for a grant maker, before going bigger. And so, it's kind of a several-year transition period. And so what I would say is the last year, in addition to grant making, we did a lot of work to strengthen our operations, and we did a lot of work to kind of get more clarity on what we call the cause prioritization problem. So that would be, how much money is eventually going to go into each of the different causes that we work in. How much should go into criminal justice reform? How much should go to support GiveWell's top charities, which we try to weigh against the other things? How much should go into AI risk, biosecurity, et cetera? So that's been a big focus of the last year or so. And going forward, it's kind of the same. I mean, we're very focused on hiring right now. We just had a director of operations start, and we've been hiring pretty fast on the operations side. And that is because we're trying to build a robust organization that is really ready to make a ton of grants and do it efficiently and do it with a good experience for the grantees. And then the other hiring we're doing is this push for research analysts. So these are going to be people who sort of help us choose between causes, help us answer these sort of esoteric questions that most foundations don't really try to analyze, like how much money should go to each cause, what causes should we work on, expect them to eventually become kind of core contributors to the organization. And so a major endeavor this year has been gearing up to find the best, our best shot, our best guess at who we should be hiring for that. So it's really a capacity building hiring time, and also a time when we're really intense about figuring out that question about how much money goes to each cause.
Okay, fantastic. And just to check, everyone knows you can ask questions on the Bizzabo app, and half an hour or so we'll start bringing those into the mix as well. So, okay, but one thing you mentioned was then something you've been working on is how do you divide the money across these very different cause areas, and this question of kind of worldview diversification. So what kind of progress do you feel like you've made on that over the last year?
Sure. So first I just want to give a little bit of background on the question, because it's kind of a weird one, and it's one that often doesn't come up in a philanthropic setting. We work in a bunch of very different causes. So like I said, we work on criminal justice reform, we work on farm animal welfare, we work on global health. How much money goes into each cause? So one way that you might think to try to answer this is you might say, well, what are we trying to do? And how much of it are we doing for every dollar that we spend? So you might say that we're trying to, let's say, prevent premature deaths. How many premature deaths are we preventing for every dollar we spend? You might try to come up with a more inclusive kind of universal metric of good accomplished. And I think there's different ways to do that. One way is to kind of say, to kind of value different things according to one scale. And so, you could use a framework similar to the QALY framework, where you say, if you avert a blindness, that's like half as good as saving a life, or something like that. And so you could put them all into one scale, and then you can say, how many units of good, so to speak, are we accomplishing for each dollar we spend? And then you would just divide up the money so that you get the maximum overall. And I think what one might think when you do that is that you start putting money into your best cause, and at a certain point, it's no longer your best cause because you're reaching diminishing returns. Like the more money you put in, the less you're getting out. And so now you put money into another cause, and that determines your allocation. And there's what I consider a problem with this approach. Not everyone would consider it a problem. What I consider it a problem is that we've run into two sort of mind-bending fundamental questions that seem like it's very hard to get away from. These questions are very hard to answer, and then they have a really huge impact on how we give. So one of them is, how do you value animals versus humans? For example, how do you value chickens versus humans? And on one hand, if you value now let's say to simplify, we're deciding between GiveWell top charities, which try to help humans with global health interventions, bed nets, cash transfers, things like that, and we're trying to decide on the other hand whether to fund these animal advocacy groups that try to push for better treatments of animals on factory farms. And without going too much into what the numbers look like, it kind of looks like if you decide that you value a chicken's experience like 1% as much as a human's, you kind of get this result back out that you should just only work on chickens. Like just all the money should go into farm animal welfare. And on the other hand, let's say that you go from 1% to 0.001% or 0 or something. You decide you don't value chickens as much as humans, and then you're going to get the result, of course, that you should just put all the money into humans. And that is kind of, it's like you've got this one parameter, and you don't know what the number should be. And when you kind of move to one number, it says you should put all the money over here. And when you move to another number, it says you should put all the money over there. The even trickier version of this question is when we talk about preventing global catastrophic risks or existential risks. When we talk about our work on things like AI risk, biosecurity, climate change, where the goal is not to help some specific set of persons or chickens, but rather to hopefully do something that will be positive for all future generations. So prevent some catastrophic effect that could ripple through future generations. And then the question is, how many future generations are there? And when if you prevent some kind of existential risk, did you just do the equivalent of preventing 7 billion premature deaths, which is about the population of the world, or did you just do the equivalent of preventing like a trillion untimely deaths? And it depends how many people there are in the future, and you pick different numbers, and it's very hard to pick the right number, and whichever number you pick, it just takes over the whole model. And so that for us, we have determined that there's a bunch of reasons we don't want to go all in on one cause. That's something we've written up on our blog. I think, among other things, if you go all in on one cause, you get all the idiosyncrasies of that cause. It could be very easy to miss a lot of good opportunities to do good if you change your mind later. It could become very hard to pull in a lot of donors and be broadly appealing if your whole work is premised on this one weird assumption and this one weird number that could have been something different. And so we don't want to be all in on one cause. And so where we kind of came to at the end of last year is that we want to have these buckets, and the different buckets of capital kind of use different assumptions. And so we might have one bucket of capital that says, preventing an existential risk is worth a trillion premature deaths averted. And so, we value every grant by how it affects the long run trajectory of the world. And another bucket might say, no, we're just going to look for things that affect kind of people alive today or that have impact we can see in our lifetimes. And then you have another bucket that takes chickens very seriously and another one that doesn't. And then you have to determine the size of those buckets. And so it's kind of this multiple stage process where you first say, there's X dollars, how much is going to be in the what we call the animal inclusive bucket versus the human centric bucket, how much is going to be in the long-termist bucket versus the near-termist bucket, and then within those buckets, now you can use your metrics a little bit more normally and decide, how much is AI risk, how much is biosecurity, how much is climate change. And then we're attacking the problem in kind of two different levels in parallel. So one of them is the abstract. So one of them is if I say just, all right, you have X dollars, how much do you want to put in the animal inclusive versus the human centric bucket? And you might kind of start with an assumption of 50-50, as a prior, and then say, well, I actually take this one bucket more seriously, so I'll put more in there, and you can have some other adjustments too. And then we've also started moving toward addressing this in a very concrete and tangible way too, where we actually create a table that says if for each set of dollars we could spend, we'll get this many chickens helped, and this many humans helped, and this many points of reduction in existential risk. And so under different assumptions, it looks like excellent by this metric, okay by that metric, really bad by that metric, and then you can just look at the table and kind of understand the trade-offs you're making. And so a lot of the work we're doing now, and a lot of the work that I think new hires will do, is filling out that table. And a lot of it is really guesswork, but to give us some rough sense of what, sort of, if we can understand what we're buying with different approaches, then hopefully we can make a more kind of reflective equilibrium decision.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. And then as part of that, you got to have this kind of answer to the question of your last dollar of funding. How good is that last dollar? And how do you think about that then, given this framework?
Sure. So the last dollar question is very central to our work, and it's kind of one of the things that brought up this dilemma, which is someone sends in a proposal for a grant, and really we have to decide, do we want to make the grant or not? And in some ways, what the question really is it better to make this grant, or is it better to save the money? And what that really means is, would this grant be better than the last dollar we're going to spend? And so, for a long time, we kind of had this last dollar concept that was based on Give Directly. Give Directly is a charity that gives out cash. So for every $100 you give, they try to get $90 to someone in an extremely low income, sort of globally low income household. And so, what we said is, if we're looking at a grant and it doesn't look as good as Give Directly, because we can sort of give almost infinite money via Give Directly eventually, we think, then why make the grant? And if it's better, then maybe we should make it. But we've definitely refined our thinking. We've definitely gotten further on that. And so, one of the things I mentioned, Give Directly is kind of a near-termist, human-centric kind of charity. And the question becomes, if you decide that instead of counting the good you're accomplishing, instead of counting people you're helping, you're counting kind of like points of reduction in global catastrophic risks, then what does your last dollar look like? And it probably doesn't look like Give Directly, because there's probably better ways to accomplish that kind of long-termist goal. And so we spent a bunch of time over the last couple of months trying to answer that question. What is the Give Directly of long-termism? What is the thing you can just spend unlimited money on and does as well as you can for increasing the odds of a bright future for the world? And so we tried a whole bunch of different things. We looked at the different possibilities. And where we are right now is we have this idea of platform technology for rapid development of medical countermeasures. So the idea is you would invest heavily in research and development, and you would hope that what you get out from a massive investment is the ability to more quickly develop like a vaccine or some kind of treatment in case there's ever a disastrous pandemic. And then you can estimate kind of the risk of a pandemic over different time frames and how much this would help and how much you're going to speed it up. And our kind of estimate ended up being that we think we could probably spend like over $10 billion in present value terms on this kind of work. And I think we estimated it. This is really kind of wild, and it's a wild guess, but we're trying to start with broad contours of things and then get more refined. But we estimate something like the low price of $245 trillion per time that you prevent extinction. So $245 trillion per reduced extinction event actually comes out to a pretty good deal.
That's pretty good. That's like total wealth of the world. So
times a few. Yeah. Or total wealth. Yeah. It's like total GDP times a few.
Yeah. Which is it's about 240 trillion is total wealth. So that's like weirdly balanced. Actually.
Yeah, exactly. But there's all this future wealth to it. So it's actually a good deal. And the funny thing is that if you just count people who are alive today, and you look at the cost per death averted kind of probabilistically and in expected terms, it's actually pretty good. It's kind of in the same ballpark as top charities. For GiveWell now, very questionable, because GiveWell's cost effectiveness estimates are quite rigorous and well researched, and this is not. And so, you don't want to go too far with that, and you don't want to say these numbers are the same, but kind of the preliminary look is, we think we can probably do better than this with most of our, most of our spending. And so this is interesting to see that last dollar looks, like not a bad deal. And now we can compare any other grants we're making that have this long-term future of humanity. We can say, are they better or worse than this medical countermeasure platform tech, because we could spend as much money as we want on that. And then we don't have a last dollar estimate yet for animal welfare. We do have a view that the current work is extremely cost effective. It's kind of in the it's under $1 per like animal, per animal's life significantly improved in a way that's kind of similar to a death averted. But it's more of a reducing suffering thing a lot of the time. And we do think we could expand the budget a lot before we saw diminishing returns there. So that's a number we're kind of working with until we get a better last dollar.
Cool. Okay, terrific. And then of all these kind of different cause areas, are there some that you're just more personally excited about than others?
Yep.
How does that factor?
Sure. I mean, I get differently excited about different causes on different days, and I'm super excited about everything we're doing because it was all picked very carefully to to be our best bet for doing the most good. And as soon as it looks bad, we tend to close it down. So I generally am excited about everything. There's different pros and cons to the different work. The farm animal work is really exciting because we're seeing tangible wins. And I think the criminal justice work also looks that way. It's just really great to be, starting to see, hey, we made a grant and something happened and it helped someone and it led to someone having a better life. And so a lot of times that does feel like the most exciting. And on the other hand, I have over the last couple of years just gotten more and more excited about the long-termist work for kind of a different reason, which is that I've started to really believe we could be living at sort of a uniquely high leverage moment in history. So, just to start off, just to set the stage, I think people kind of tend to walk around thinking like, well, the world economy, this is certainly how I walk around, the world economy grows at around 2% a year in real terms, maybe 1 to 3%. And that's how things are, and that's how things have ever been and have been for a long time and will be for a long time. I think that's basically like a weird way of thinking about things, because I think that rate of growth is super weird and super historically anomalous. It's been like 200 or 300 years that we've had that level of growth. That's like 10 generations or something. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of human history. Before that, we had much slower growth. And then when we look to the future, for many, many reasons that I'm not going to get into now, we believe there are advanced technologies such as highly capable AI, where you could either see that growth rate skyrocket and then maybe kind of flatten out as we get radically better at doing science and developing new technologies, or you could see a global catastrophe. And I think, again, it's probably possible today, it could be possible to wipe ourselves out completely with nuclear weapons. In the future, there may be other ways of doing it, like climate change and new kinds of pandemics with synthetic biology. Until, as of 100 years ago, there was basically almost no reasonably likely way for humanity to go extinct. And so there's a lot of things that look special about this time that we live in. It's kind of the highest upside, the highest downside maybe that's ever been seen before. One way to think about it is you could think that civilization or humanity, but more humanity, has been around for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, depending how you count it. Could be around for billions of years from now, but we might be in the middle of like the most important 100 years. And when I think about it that way, then I think, boy, someone should really be keeping their eye on this. And the other thing is that to a large degree, people aren't. Even climate change, which is better known than a lot of the other risks, sufficient action is not being taken. Governments are not making it a priority to the extent that I think they reasonably should. And so as someone who has the freedom to spend money how we want, and the ability to think about these things and act on them without having to worry about a profit motive or accountability to kind of near-term outcomes, we're in a really special position to do something. And I think that's it's exciting. It's also scary. So.
Cool. And so then over the last year, what sort of are there particular grants that you think people in the audience might not know as much about that you are particularly excited about? You think are going to be particularly good? Important?
Yeah. There's a lot of grants I'm excited about. I'm guessing people know about things like our OpenAI grant, which I'm excited about, and our many grants to support animal welfare, corporate campaigning in the US, abroad, India, Europe, Latin America, et cetera. I'll skip over those. I'll name some others people might not have heard of. Very excited about the AI Fellows program. So we recently announced a set of early career AI scientists who we are giving fellowships to. It was a very competitive process. These scientists are really, really exceptional. They're some of the best, really some of the best AI researchers flat out for their career stage. And then they're also, they're interested in AI safety. They're interested in kind of not just making AI more powerful, but in making it something that's going to have better outcomes, behave better, have fewer bugs, et cetera, solving the alignment problem, things like that. And we found a great combination of just like really excellent technical abilities and then kind of a seriousness and an open-mindedness to some of the more, the less mainstream parts of AI that we think are the most important, like the alignment problem. And so our goal here is to kind of have these fellows to help them learn from the AI safety community and get up to speed and become some of the best AI safety researchers out there, and also to make it more common knowledge in AI that this is a good career move to work on AI safety. And I think it's exciting as a foundation to be engaging in field building and trying to make it true more than it was before that working on AI safety is a good career move. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about we're working, our science team is working on a kind of universal antiviral drug. So believe that a lot of viruses, like maybe all of them, rely on these particular proteins in your body. to replicate themselves and to have their effects. And so if you can inhibit those proteins, and we already have some drugs that do it, and that are kind of safe because they're already being used for cancer treatment, things like that. If you can inhibit those drugs, you might have a drug that is not something you'd want to take every time you got a virus, but might work on every virus, which could make it a really excellent thing to have if some unexpectedly terrible pandemic comes, and to stockpile. So that's super cool. I think in general, I'm often excited when I just see that we're doing something that is, we have a couple grants that are just all about speed. So there's a couple of science grants where just like there's a technology that looks great, everyone's kind of excited about it, there's not that much to argue about. Gene drives to potentially eradicate malaria, there's an experimental treatment for sepsis that could save a lot of lives, and we're just speeding them up. So we just, I kind of feel proud as an organization and of our operations team and all of that we're sometimes able to make a grant where we're like, yeah, everyone knows this is good, but we're the fastest. Yeah. We can get the money out now, and we can make this happen sooner, and happening sooner saves enough lives or whatever that it's a good deal. So those are some of the things I'm excited about.
Cool. I mean, that's a lot of exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, switching gear a bit and talking about the EA community a little bit. What do you wish kind of was happening in the EA community that currently isn't, you think? That might be projects, organizations, career paths, lines of intellectual inquiry, and so on.
Yeah, I think I think the EA community is an exciting thing, and a great source of a lot of people have really interesting ideas and make us think, and have affected our thinking a lot and our cause prioritization a lot. I think right now it's a community that is very heavy on sort of people who are philosopher types and economist types and computer programmer types, and all of those somewhat describe me. And so and I think we have a lot of those, and I think those folks do a lot of good. But I would like to see a broader variety of just different types of people in the community, because I think there are people who are more intuitive thinkers who wouldn't want to sit around at a party kind of debating whether the parameter for the moral weight of chickens is 1% or 0.01%, and what anthropics might have to do with that. Might not be interested in that, but they still have serious potential as effective altruists because they're able to say, I would like to help people, and I would like to do it as well as I can. And so they might be able to say things like, boy, there's an issue in the world. Maybe it's animal welfare, maybe it's AI, maybe it's something else that it's so important, and no one's working on it. And I think there's something I can do about it, so I want to work on that. And that's, you don't need to engage in hours of philosophy to get there. And I think a lot of people who are more intuitive thinkers, who may be less interested in that stuff, have a lot to offer us as a community and can accomplish a lot of things that the current, that the philosopher, programmer, economist type is not always as strong in. And so, that is something I would love to see. I would love to see it if the effective altruism community could find a way to just get a broader variety of people and be a little bit, more like that.
Cool, terrific. And then in your own life, you're managing a lot of money. There's a lot at stake. How do you keep yourself sane? Like, does this cause you to overwork? How do you balance working with time off?
Sure. I mean, I think we're working on a lot of exciting stuff, and I certainly know people who, when they're working on exciting stuff, they tend to just like work all the time, and they tend to burn out. I've been like really pretty intense about not doing that. I definitely have been working on, co-founded GiveWell like 11 years ago, and just been working continuously since then. GiveWell, Open Philanthropy. So, maybe at the beginning it felt like I was sprinting, but right now it really, really feels like a marathon. I try to treat it that way. So, I'm just very attentive to if I start feeling a lack of motivation, I just take a break. I do a lot of really stupid things with my time that put me in a better mood. I don't feel bad about it.
Name some stupid things, go on.
Oh, I mean, just like going to weird conferences where I don't like know anyone or have anything to contribute, and talking to everyone there. Video games, like my wife and I like to just like have stuffed animals with very bizarre personalities and act out. So now you know some things. So I mean, I don't feel bad about it. And something that I've done actually for a long time now, I think like starting around 2 years into GiveWell, is that I actually have tracked my kind of focused hours, my meaningful hours. And at a certain point, I just took an average over like the last 6 months. And I was like, that's my target. That's the average. When I hit the average, I'm done for the week. Unless it's a special week, unless I really need to work more that week. And you know what that does is it is sustainable, because I think going at more than the average would not be sustainable. And two, it just puts me in a mindset where I know how many hours I have and I have to make the most of them. And I think, you know, there are people who say, if I could just work hard enough, I'll get everything done. And I don't think that works for me. I think it is often a bad idea. One way that I think about it is, you know, the most you can increase your output from working harder is often around like 25%. If you want to increase your output by 5x, by 10x, you need to get better at skipping things, deciding what not to do, deciding what shortcuts to take, and also you need to get good at hiring, managing, deciding who should be doing what, deciding it shouldn't be you, doing a lot of things. You know, I feel like my productivity has gone up by a very large amount, and there's a lot of variance. Like when I make bad decisions, I might get 1/10 as much done in a month, but it's not by working more hours. And so that's, you know, that is definitely something that I do that, you know, even though I think we're doing a lot of exciting stuff, I do take it easy in that sense.
Cool. And so then over the last decade, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes you've made or things you wish you'd done differently?
Yeah, I got lots of fun mistakes. And you said last decade, so that rules out a lot of fun stuff. Had some notes on this because it's hard to keep track of all my mistakes. So I think, hang on, just give me a sec. I think I'm looking at the wrong thing. So I will say a couple things. One thing is I think early on, and still kind of all the time, I think without meaning to, a lot of times we've communicated in kind of a careless way. And I think especially early on, our kind of view was more attention is better. We really need to get people paying attention to us. And the problem is that a lot of the things we said, kind of, they never go away. The internet never forgets. And I think also people who may have, you know, been turned off by our early communications, like that's you never get the second chance to make that first impression. And you know, when I look back at it, I think, was it really that important to get that much attention? And no, it wasn't. I think over the long run, if we had just kind of been quiet and said something when we really had something to say and said it carefully, I don't know that anything really would have gone that differently. Maybe it just would have gone better. You know, we've really succeeded to the extent we've succeeded on just having good research that we can explain, and then people resonate with it. So I don't know that we really had to do it that way. You know, I think another mistake that I look back on, I think I was too slow to get excited about the effective altruism community. So, you know, when we were starting off, I knew that we were working on something that most people didn't seem to care about. I knew that we were asking the question, how do we do the most good that we can with a certain amount of resources? And I kind of knew that there were other people asking a similar question, but we were speaking very different languages from each other. And so it was hard for me to really see that those people were kind of asking the same question I was asking. And so I think a lot of what we did is we were a bit, I wouldn't say totally dismissive, like we talked to the proto-effective altruists and everything before it was called effective altruism. But I think it didn't really hit me, like, boy, if there's important insights about my work that I'm missing because I don't have enough people, you know, with different perspectives, the most likely way to find those insights is to find people who have the same goal and are different from me. And the fact they speak a different language from me and they kind of a lot of their stuff sounds loopy, I mean, that's just good. That means that there's going to be at least some degree of different perspectives here. So, you know, I think we've profited a lot from engaging with the EA community. We've learned a lot, and we could have done it earlier. So I think that's a mistake. And then the final thing, like, here's a mistake that I will not go into details on, and it's more like a class of mistakes. But in general, I feel like the decisions these days that I'm most nervous about are hiring, recruiting, because most of the things we do at Open Phil, we've like figured out how to do them in kind of an incremental way. You do something, you see how it goes. You do something, you see how it goes, and nothing's ever that disastrous or that epic. And when you're recruiting, it's just like someone's saying, should I leave my job or not? And you have to say yes or no. And it's such an incredibly high leverage decision that it's become clear to me that when we do it wrong, it's such a huge problem and such a huge cost to us. And we do it right, it just makes it. You know, it makes everything we do, and basically, you know, everything we've been able to do is just because of the people that we have. So those are the make or break decisions, and we often have to make them in a week, and we have to make them on limited information. Sometimes we get them right, sometimes we get them wrong. I think there's a lot of ones we've gotten wrong that I don't know about, and so a lot of the biggest mistakes have to be in that category.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so then, what kind of headline career advice would you give to the EAs in the audience who are currently kind of figuring out what they want to do? Like, how do you think about that question in general?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I obviously kind of only in some sense have one career to look at, although we also, since we interact with a lot of grantees, we also do kind of notice, who's having a big impact according to us and what's been their trajectory. And one thing that I do kind of think whenever I talk to people about this topic, I get the sense that effective altruists, especially early in their career, are often kind of impatient for impact relative to what they should be. So, I think a lot of the people I know who seem to be in the best position to do something big, it's like they did something for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Sometimes the thing was kind of random, but they picked up skills, they picked up connections, they picked up expertise. And I think a lot of the big wins we've seen, both stuff we funded and stuff we haven't, it looks less like someone came out of college and had impact every year and then it added up to something good. And it looks more like someone might have just been working on themselves in their career for 20 years, and then they had one really good year, and that's just everything. And it's, that makes your career in terms of your impact. And so, I do think a lot of early career effective altruists, I kind of think if they just switched and made the opposite mistake, which I think would also be a mistake, just forget about impact and just say, what can I be good at? How can I grow? How can I become the person I want to be? I think that probably wouldn't be worse, and that might be better. And I think the ideal is some kind of balance. But I think that would be, a high level thing that I do end up giving that advice a lot. I don't know if it's right or not, but it's definitely something that I say a lot.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So a couple of people were interested in a small question of just, what is your average number of hours per week then? I think you can say no comment if you don't.
I've actually, for focused hours, for the time I was doing it was 40. So, hours on the clock would be more than that.
Yeah.
And then recently I've actually stopped counting them up because now I'm in meetings all the time. And one of the things that I've found is my hours are way higher when I have a ton of meetings. And if I'm sitting there trying to write a blog post, they're way lower. So it doesn't, it doesn't seem as worth tracking as it used to, but there's your answer.
Yeah. I mean, I think getting into the mindset different hours can be 100 times more valuable.
Yeah.
Frank Ramsey was one of the most important thinkers of the early 20th century, but died at 26, which is why no one knows about him. He just worked 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
He made amazing breakthroughs in philosophy, decision theory, economics, maths. It's insane.
That's incredible.
So another thing a couple of people were interested in was Open Phil's attitude to political funding. So firstly, just whether you have a policy with respect to funding organizations that do political lobbying, and then secondly, in particular, funding particular candidates rather than other candidates who may increase or decrease existential risks.
Yep. I mean, there's just Open Phil. There's no real reason in principle that we can't do that, and so we kind of treat political giving or policy-oriented giving the same as anything else, which is we kind of say, hey, if we work on this, what are the odds that our funding contributes to something good happening in the world, and what is the value of that, and what is the if you kind of multiply out the probabilities in a sense, how good does that make the work look, and how does that compare to our last dollar, and how does that compare to our other work, and if it looks good enough and there aren't other concerns, we'll do it. I don't want to say, I mean, we do most of our grants, we're not actually calculating these figures, but we're kind of trying to do something that approximates them. So for example, we work on causes that are important, neglected, and tractable, and we tend to rate things on importance, neglectedness, and tractability because we think those things are predictive and correlative with the kind of total good accomplished per dollar. So a lot of times you can't really get a good estimate of how much good you're doing per dollar, but you can kind of use that idea to guide yourself and to motivate yourself. And so, the answer on politics is that. I think in some ways in politics there's an elevated risk. You should have an elevated risk that you're just wrong, and you should remember that when you're doing things that you think are good. And so, if it looks like giving to bed nets to prevent malaria helps people a certain amount, and giving to this very controversial issue that you're sure you're right about helps people a certain amount, I mean, and they're the same, probably the bed nets are better. Because you're probably got some bias toward what you want to believe in politics. And that said, I don't think that I don't think things are necessarily balanced. Like I think on political issues, people have a lot of reasons for holding the political views they do other than this is what's best for the world as a whole. And so when our goal is best for the world as a whole, it's not always that complicated to figure out which side is the side to go in on. It's not always impossible to see that. So yeah, I mean, we can and do fun things that are aimed at changing policy. And in some cases, we've recommended contributions that are trying to change those kind of outcomes.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So then another thing a couple of people are interested in is what Open Phil's and your plans are for trying to influence other major foundations, other philanthropists. What are your kind of aims and plans there?
Yeah. So one of the cool things about Open Phil is that we are trying to do our work in a way where we find out kind of how to help the most people with the least money, or how to do the most good with the least money, or per dollar. And then we recommend that to currently our main funders are Carrie and Dustin. But there's no reason that recommendation would be different for another person. So a lot of times if there were a Will MacAskill Foundation, maybe it would be about what Will wants, and its recommendations would not be interesting to other people. Actually, I know your foundation would not have that issue, but that is the more normal way to be. And we definitely have aspirations that we think the work we're doing, the research, the lessons are applicable to other philanthropists. And so, down the line, I would love it to be the case that we see way more good things to do with money than we have, than Carrie and Dustin have money. And so we're going out and pitching other people on it and trying to raise far more than Carrie and Dustin could give. So that's definitely where we're trying to go. That's not what we're focused on right now, because we're still below the giving level we would need just to accomplish the giving goals of Carrie and Dustin. And so, we're focused on that, and we're focused on just also having a better organization, more of a track record, stronger intellectual framework, just better, something more solid to point to and say, here is our reason that this is a good way to do philanthropy. So we make early moves now. We talk to people who are philanthropists, who will be philanthropists, but it's not our big focus now, but I think in a few years it could be.
Okay, terrific. And then, so you emphasized a lot, you kind of got criminal justice reform, existential risks with bio and AI, animal welfare, global health. Is there like another cause that you think you'll like branch out into over the next kind of couple of years? And if so, what might that be? What's some potential candidates?
Sure. I mean, I do see a lot of the next few years as trying to stay focused when it comes to our grant making, but also a lot of, and as we're doing that, to figure out more clarity around, again, this question of long-termism versus near-termism, and, how much money is going to each. And I think that will affect in the future how we want to look for new causes. So I think we will look for new causes in the future. It's not our biggest focus in the immediate term. But one thing we do is a lot of times we will pick a cause based on partly on who we can hire for it. And we're a very big believers in a people-centric approach to giving. We believe that a lot of times if you support someone who's really good, it makes an enormous difference. Even if maybe the cause is 10% worse, but the person is way more promising. So we originally had a bunch of policy causes we were interested in hiring for, and criminal justice became a major cause for us, and the other ones didn't, because we found someone who we were excited to lead our criminal justice reform work. That's Chloe Coburn, and we didn't for some of the other ones. But I would say one cause we may get more involved in the future, and I kind of hope we do, is macroeconomic stabilization policy. Not the world's best known cause, but it's the idea is that some of the most important decisions in the world are made at the Federal Reserve, which is trying to balance the risks of inflation and unemployment. And we've come to the view that there's kind of an institutional bias in a particular direction, kind of more inflation aversion than is consistent with kind of a best, most good for everyone kind of attitude. And we think some of that reflects the politics around it and the kind of pressures they come under. And so we've been interested in that cause for a while. I think it's there's this not very well known institution, not very well understood. It makes these decisions that are kind of esoteric. It's not a big political issue, but it may have a bigger impact on the world economy and on the working class than basically anything else the government is doing, maybe anything else that anyone is doing. So I would love to get more involved in that cause, but I think to do it really well, we would need someone who's all the way in. I mean, we would need someone who's just obsessed with that issue because it's very complex.
Yeah, and would that be? Do you feel like that's kind of justified on the near-termist, human-centric view, or do you think it's got potentially very long-run impacts too?
Yeah, I think that one's kind of a twofer. I haven't totally figured out. We haven't tried to do the calculations on both axes, but certainly, I mean, it seems it seems like broad-based growth and lower unemployment. I think there's a lot of reasons to think that might lead to better societal outcomes, just like better broad-based values, which are then reflected in the kinds of policies we enact and the kinds of people we elect. I do think that if the economy is growing, especially if that growth is benefiting everyone across the economy, if labor markets are tighter, if workers have better bargaining power, better lives, better prospects in the future, I do think that is a global catastrophic risk reducer in some way. I haven't totally decided, how does the magnitude of that compare to everything else? But I think if we had the opportunity to go bigger in that cause, we would be thinking harder about it.
Okay, terrific. And then with so current distribution across causes, is it the case that you think something could happen, or you could learn something, or maybe just ethically reflect or something, such that you'd say, okay, actually we're just going to go all in on one cause? Like, is that conceivable, or are you going to stay fixed?
Sure. I think it's conceivable we could go all in, but not soon. So I think as long as we think of ourselves as kind of an early stage organization, one of the big reasons to not go all in is kind of option value. And this way we get to learn about a lot of different kinds of giving. We're building capacity for a lot of things. And so, I want to have that option to change my mind later. And so, there's a bunch of advantages to being spread out across different causes. But one of the big ones, it's like, yeah, maybe in 30 years we'll just be like, well, we've been at this forever and we're not going to change our minds. Yeah. And now we're going all in. And that's something I can imagine, but I can't really imagine it happening soon.
Yeah, okay, terrific. And then another thing a couple of people were interested in is like the relationship now or what attitude should like a small individual donor kind of have? So a couple of thoughts. One is like, well, can they donate to Open Phil or Good Ventures? Another is just, well, what's the point of me donating? There's this huge foundation that's I think is like really good. So I'd be interested in your views on that.
Yeah, so individual donors cannot donate to Open Phil at the moment. We just haven't set that up. We haven't set up the customer service and all that stuff and processing that we would need. So we're not taking donations. There are the effective altruist funds, I think is what they're called at CEA. So some of our staff manage donor-advised funds that are not Open Phil, that are outside Open Phil, but you can give to an animal welfare fund that is run by Lewis, who's our farm animal welfare program officer, and he will kind of look at what was he not able to fund that he wished he could have funded with Open Phil funds, and he'll use your funds on it. So that is an option for individual donors. But yeah, I think there's definitely donating can definitely do a lot of good despite our existence. I mean, we certainly, yes, we are. The capital we're working with is a lot compared to any individual, but it's not a lot compared to the size of the need in the world and the amount of good that we can accomplish. So, certainly we do not believe, given our priorities, given the weight that we're putting on long-termism versus near-termism, et cetera, we are now pretty confident that we just do not have enough available to fund the GiveWell top charities to their capacity, and not just Give Directly, but some of the ones that are really quite. According to our analyses, are an even better deal than Give Directly for, bang for the buck. So, bed nets to prevent malaria and seasonal chemo prevention treatment also to prevent malaria, deworming, some other cool programs. That is, you can donate there and you will get kind of an amazing deal in terms of helping people for a little money. I know some people don't feel satisfied with that. They think they can do better with long-termism or with an animal-centric view. I think if you're animal-centric, we are also currently have some limits on the budget for animal welfare, and so you can give to that effective altruist fund, or you can look at animal charity evaluators and their recommendations, or just give to farm animal groups you believe in. Long-termism right now is the one where it's kind of it's the least obvious what someone should do if they're trying to reduce global catastrophic risks, and but I think there's still things to do. So among the things going on, we're currently very hesitant to be more than 50% of any organization's budget unless we feel just incredibly well positioned to be their only point of accountability. Yeah. So there are organizations where we say we understand exactly what's going on here, and we're fine to be the only decision maker on how this org is doing. And other orgs, we just don't want them to be that dependent on us.
Yeah.
So there are orgs, working on existential risk reduction, global catastrophic risk reduction. Most of them, and effective altruist community building. Most of them we just won't go over 50%, and so they need, in some sense, to match our money with money from others. So I would say generally, no matter what you're into, I mean, there's definitely something good you can do with your money. So I still think donating is good.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then, so you talked a bit in terms of your grants about technical AI safety that you've been funding. One person was asking about, well, what about AI strategy? Whether you're interested in funding that, whether you've done that in the past, maybe explain what that means as well.
Sure. So AI strategy is a huge interest of ours. So one way of putting it is that when we think about potential risks from very advanced AI, we kind of think of two problems that interact with each other and kind of make each other potentially worse. I mean, it's very hard to see the future, but these are things that are worth thinking about because of how big a deal they would be. So one of them is the value alignment problem, and that's this idea that it may be very hard to build something that's sort of, in some sense, much smarter than anyone who built it, and much better at thinking in every way, and much better at optimizing, and still have that thing sort of behave itself, so to speak. And so it may be very hard to get it to do what its creators sort of intended, and do it sort of smarter than them, but not too different from them. And so that's the value alignment problem, and that's, most people consider it mostly a technical problem. So a lot of the research that's going on is how can we build AI systems that can kind of work with vague goals, the kind of goals that humans are probably going to be capable of giving to AI systems. So how can they work with vague, poorly defined goals and still kind of figure them out in a way that's in line with the original human intentions? Also, how can we build AI systems that are robust? So AI systems that, if they trained in one environment and then the environment changes, they don't totally break. They kind of realize they're dealing with something new. The world has changed, and now they don't totally do crazy things. So that's the alignment problem. That's technical research. And then, there's this other side we think about, the deployment problem, which is what if you have an extremely powerful general purpose technology that could lead to a really large concentration of power? And the question is sort of who? I mean, is it a government? Is it a company? Is it a person? Who kind of has the moral right to launch such a thing and to say, hey, I have this very powerful thing and I'm going to use it to change the world in some way? Who kind of has the right to do that, and what kind of outcomes can we expect based on if different groups do it? And one of the things that we're worried about is that you might have a world where, let's say 2 different countries are both trying to be the first to kind of develop a very powerful AI, because if they can, they believe it will help their power, their standing in the world. And because they're in this race and because they're competitive with each other, they're cutting corners and they're launching as fast as they can, and so they're not very careful about this other issue I mentioned. And so they kind of release a carelessly designed AI, and then the AI ends up unaligned, and it ends up behaving in crazy ways, and it has bugs, and something that's very intelligent and very powerful and has bugs could be like very, very bad. And so AI strategy, in my take, is kind of working on that deployment problem, reducing the odds that there's going to be this kind of arms race or whatever, increasing the odds that there's this kind of deliberate, wise decision about like what is powerful AI going to be used for and who's going to make that decision. And I think there's a lot of really interesting questions there. We're super interested in it. I mean, we've definitely made grants in that area. We've supported Future of Humanity Institute to do work on that. We're currently investigating, a couple of other grants there. We've put out a job posting for just, someone who wanted to think about AI strategy all day and wanted to do it, didn't have another place to go, but if we thought they were really good, we could sort of fund them ourselves, and that's sitting on our website. So and then also I think our support of OpenAI, I mean, that's kind of a little bit of both. And so when we support OpenAI, we're kind of trying to encourage OpenAI as an organization to do a lot of technical safety research, but also to be thinking, hey, we're a company that might be on the lead of AI. Like, what are we going to do if we're there? Who are we going to loop in? We're going to be in conversations about how this thing should be used. What's our position going to be, and who should use it? And so, we've really encouraged them to build out a team of people who can be thinking about that question all the time, and they are working on that. And so, this is a major interest of ours.
Yeah, terrific. And so you mentioned, one of the key ways in which there could be a worry is if there's a arms race, perhaps literally it's kind of wartime or something.
Yeah.
Would you be interested, and how do you think about, trying to make grants to reduce the chance of some sort of great power war?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really good to have a lower odds of a great power war, just flat out. Maybe some of the possibility for advanced technologies makes it even more good to reduce the odds of a great power war, and that's an area that we have not spent much time on. I know there is a reasonable amount of foundation interest in what looks like the peace area. And so it's not immediately neglected at first glance. That said, a lot of things that look like they're getting attention at first glance, you kind of refine your model a little bit, you decide what the most promising angle on it is, and you may find that there's something neglected. So I think it's something I'd love to look into at some point, and it might be an example of a really awesome cause that we haven't had the capacity to look into, and if someone else saw something great to do, they should definitely not wait for us.
Okay, terrific. And then another cause that some people were asking about was suffering of animals in the wild, whether you might be interested in making grants to improve that issue.
Sure. Wild animal welfare, I mean, I think there's definitely just off the bat kind of questions about, is there anything you could do to improve wild animal welfare that wouldn't kind of cause a lot of other problems and wouldn't perhaps pose these problems that come from this hubris of, there's these very complex ecosystems, we didn't create them, we don't understand them, we're intervening in them. So, and then another problem with working on wild animal welfare is, we just haven't seen a lot of shovel-ready stuff. And so, something I will say is there's probably a lot going on where human activity or some other factor is making it the case that there are probably animals in the wild, and a lot of them, a really large number of them, that could be kind of a lot better off than they are. Could be suffering, could be better off, maybe just could have better lives, if not for certain things about the ecosystem they're in that may be human caused, maybe not. And so I see potential there, but we've got the issue I mentioned, and we've got just it hasn't been obvious, what are some grants you could make that might improve the welfare of animals in the wild, that might kind of, accomplish this goal of making other beings better off and not having kind of a bunch of problems come along with them. And it just hasn't been that clear to us, but we are kind of continuing to talk about it and look into it in the background, and it's something we may do in the future.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And then final question then is just, 2017 year review, you said, well, we've actually already been able to see some successes in particular criminal justice reform and animal welfare. So I'd be interested if you just talk a bit more about that, and then what lessons do you feel you've kind of learned, whether they transfer to the things which are harder to measure success?
Yeah, so we're early. So I think we've only been doing large-scale grant making for like a couple of years. So a lot of our grant making is on these long time frames, so it's a little early to be asking that we see impact. But I would say we're seeing early hints of impact. So the clearest case is the farm animal welfare, where we kind of came in and there were a couple really big victories that had already been achieved, like a McDonald's pledge that all their eggs would be cage-free. And so there's definitely already momentum. We came in and we kind of poured gasoline on it in a sense. I mean, we went to all the groups that had been getting these wins, and we went to some of the groups that hadn't, and we said, would you like to do more? Would you like to grow your staff? Would you like to, just go after these groups? And, within a year, basically every major grocer and every major fast food company in America had made a cage-free pledge, approximately. And so hopefully if those pledges are adhered to, which is a question and something we work on, but hopefully 10 years from now, you won't even be able to get eggs from caged chickens in the US, or it'll be very impractical to do so. That'd be nice. I mean, I'm not happy with how the cage-free chickens are treated either, but it's a lot better. It's a big step up, and I think it's also a big morale win for the movement and creates some momentum, because from there, what we've been doing now is starting to build the international, corporate campaigns, and some of those already existed and some of them didn't, but we have been funding work all over the world to try and, next time we would love to be part of those early wins that got the ball rolling and not just coming in late and trying to make things go faster. And so that's been pretty exciting. And we've seen wins, on broiler chickens, which is kind of the next step in the US after cage chickens, or after layer hens. And then we've seen wins overseas. And so we've seen wins overseas, and so that's been exciting, and just these corporate campaigns have been one of the quicker things we've funded, because I think a lot of times with the corporation, it wouldn't actually cost them that much to treat the chickens better. Someone just has to kind of complain loudly about it, and then it happens. That seems to be how it goes. So then in criminal justice reform, we picked that cause partly because we saw the opportunity to potentially make a difference and get some wins, unlike a lot of other policy causes. And one of the early things we saw was a couple of bipartisan bills in Illinois that we think are really going to have quite a large impact on incarceration there, and that we believe our grantees and with our marginal funding were crucial for. We've also just seen kind of a little bit of a mini beginning of a wave of prosecutors getting elected, head prosecutors, who have different values from the normal head prosecutors. So instead of being all about tough on crime and whom do we lock up, there's someone, for example, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia has put out a memo to his whole office that says, when you propose someone's sentence, you're going to have to estimate the cost of that to the state. It's like $45,000 a year to put someone in prison, and you're going to have to explain why it is worth that money to us to put this person in prison. And you're also going to, if you want to start a plea bargain and you want to start it lower than the minimum sentence, you're going to have to get my permission. I'm the head prosecutor. So it's a different attitude. It's prosecutors who are saying, my goal is not to lock up as many people as possible. My goal is to balance costs and benefits and do the right by my community. And I think there's been a bunch of orgs and a bunch of funders involved in that. I don't think any of these are things I would call like open philanthropy productions. They're things that we think we helped with. We sped along. We got some share, of the work being done. So, we're excited about that. Those are two of the causes that have nearer term ambitions. I can't say I've seen wins on biosecurity yet. Other than the fact that there's been no pandemic that killed everyone.
Good sign.
I don't give us much credit for that or any. So, and then I think in terms of lessons, I think we've just kind of seen what's been working and what's not in those causes where there's more action and more things happening. So I think one of the things that I think we are seeing is our basic setup of giving program officers high autonomy, I think has been working pretty well, and that a lot of these grants, they're not the ones I would have come up with, and in some cases they weren't even ones I was very excited about beforehand. And it was, we have systems for kind of trying to give our program officers the ability to sometimes make grants that we don't fully agree with, and try to reduce veto points, reduce the need for total consensus, and have people at the organization try and make bets that may not be universally agreed to or even agreed to by me or Carrie and Dustin. And I think looking at some of the grants that have been effective, I think that's a good move. So I will continue to do things that don't seem right to me, and I'm very excited about that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we better wrap up now. But thanks so much, Holden, for coming on stage. And thank you for your work.
Yeah. Thank you.